Book 1, Chapter 1. Over the sound system, the teacher's voice was monotone. The developed world considers itself ultimately advanced technologically, scientifically, and culturally. Consider this, our nation's epitome. We have mastered the science of life. The science of life? Now what was that? This was the question being posed by Seth Dyson's biology teacher, and he loathed it. He hated biology. He hated school. They were lecturing them in lies, and he seemed to be the only one who cared. The science of life. Ever since his parents' death, Seth believed he had discovered this truth. The events of that foul day had caused him to feel like a leaf at the end of autumn, a fragile stem, hanging at the tip of a branch and expecting to fall. Similar to the cinema of old, the students sat in rows of darkness, their faces blinking in the light, which flickered from the giant screen at the front of the classroom. The lecture hall was huge and more than wide enough to house the 350 students who were expected to feel proud to attend Magic Fire Superior College. A testament to the school's motto, perfection is not to be strived for, but a way of life. Every single one of the students sat perfectly in the flickering light, their focus directly ahead of them, ears attuned and behaving. Everybody, that is, apart from Rockwell Evans, self-proclaimed hard man of the college, who had just rolled a spitball of paper in his mouth and spat it directly at the one pupil who, despite his inferior status, never seemed to be afraid of him, Seth Dyson. The soppy ball of paper seemed to fly the short distance between them in slow motion. It hit Seth on the nape of his neck, found its way beneath his starch white shirt and dripped down his back, sliding in between his shoulder blades and causing him to squirm with each moment of its descent. Ahead of them, the characterless teacher's face was being projected from the central government's education headquarters and was oblivious to the mayhem about to begin. The perfectly shaped mouth which belonged to the face on the screen introduced the topic for the coming semester. The advancement of the human genome, the reason why the Lenkin Laboratory is the most honoured in the known universe, and the reason why our army, the C1 Army, is the most powerful in the world. His hypnotic voice boomed too loudly out of the microscopic speakers that lined the single-storey lecture hall, and each statement was accompanied by distortion and crackle. After a few seconds, the teacher's face dissolved and was replaced by a diagram showing human DNA, the double helix. Some of the students felt a flicker of excitement pulsing in their necks. They sat up, perched themselves higher on the flat wooden benches, whilst others uncrossed their legs. It wasn't the subject of the lecture which had caught their curiosity. It was the aura of intensity which was spreading like a vicious rumour throughout the hall. As the teacher's face returned on screen, smiled and began to speak of the complexities and the opportunities that arose from cloning humans, Seth had flown out of his place, swung himself round and had violently pummeled Rockwell Evans in the face. "You snake!" Seth yelled as he landed heavy blow after heavy blow. "You wretched excuse for existence!" His knuckles smashed down, instantly breaking Rockwell's nose. Those who had been sat next to Rockwell were aghast, not so much by the aggression that they were witnessing, but by the language Seth had used. The word snake was one of the 85 banned taboo words in Magic Fire's school rulebook. The bridge of Rockwell's nose cracked loudly, and a small trickle of blood lined down his face and dripped off his lip. Rockwell was a stocky lad with an immaculate blonde crew cut, chiselled jawline and misty green eyes. He thought of himself much tougher than any C1 soldier, and was thoroughly surprised at the stinging sensation that now permeated his face, coupled with the fact that Seth had dared to strike him. As he reeled backwards from the force of Seth's initial attack, his right hand instinctively came up to touch his nose and check the damage. Feeling the sharp bone jutting out from the centre of his face made him erupt in fury. "I will kill you," he screamed. Seth tried to wrestle his body away from Rockwell's grip, but there was no gap, nowhere he could feel a way to get himself free. As Rockwell's hand tightened around his throat, he knew this was a fight to the death. He somehow managed to contort himself in a fashion to push the heavy hand away. Gasping for breath, he glanced up as Rockwell's huge mass loomed over him, appearing to blot out the light. Screwing up his large forehead in rage and causing the white bone down the centre of his face to protrude even further, Rockwell shoved both his palms forwards. Ensuring he inflicted as much pain as possible, Rockwell made sure the bones at the base of his wrists dug deep into Seth's chest when he pushed him. It had the desired effect. Seth toppled backwards, clutching his ribs and howling in agony. The pain he felt was immense, like being hit repeatedly with a warhammer. The force of the double punch had completely knocked him off balance and over the bench he had been sat on. Thinking that the pain couldn't get any worse, he realised he was wrong as he felt the full weight of Rockwell bearing down on top of him. The energy of the fight began to spread like a spark in a tinderbox. With no physical teachers in the room to stop the developments, the students sensed an opportunity had arisen for something to occur that could never possibly happen at Magic Fire Superior College. Disobedience. Rockwell grabbed Seth's head between his hands and squealed in joy at the opportunity to cause so much pain. From his infuriated mouth, he spat out angry words at Seth. He was so pent up with rage, his words came out in a hurry and were almost completely unintelligible. "Better a snake than a natural birth, bastard." Seth's head became a pneumatic drill as Rockwell began smacking it against and into the hard wooden floor. By now, the teacher's second topic of discussion, DNA and evolved evolution, was long forgotten. He may as well have been preaching to an empty congregation as pupils surged from every corner of the room, encircling the wrestling pair, all hoping to get a glimpse of the chaos before someone put an end to it. "Fight, fight, fight," they chanted, clapping their hands as if it's a boxing match championship, screeching in delight and waiting to see more blood. Most of the students sided with Rockwell, whooping in support as he pounded Seth's head harder and harder into the floor. A few students raised their fists into the air, however, and quietly aimed their words at Seth, ordering him to knock the snake out. The students may have disagreed on who they wanted to win the fight, though all agreed that there would only be one winner. In this battle, Seth was the obvious underdog, 1,000,000 to 1 shot. After all, this was a battle of man versus clone, and they didn't need a teacher to tell them who was the most physically vulnerable. Thud. Seth's hard skull was rammed against the floor again, the back of his skull breaking the wooden slats beneath and causing long cracks to appear and spread out like veins across the floor. Above him, Rockwell's green eyes had frosted over. His icy glare examined his victim, searching for an organ to dissect. He was growing impatient. Why hadn't Seth's skull cracked yet? Why hadn't this inferior being's brain turned into mush? The yells and screams of the teenagers in the hall now drowned out the warning message that reverberated from the speakers. "Return to your seats now, so order may resume. Return to your seats now, so order may resume." Lot Benedict had managed to push his way to the front of the crowd of students who watched the fight. He eased his way to the spot by the bench that was closest to Seth's leg. He made a move to help his friend, but loose Ferdinand, who everyone called Ferdy, held him back. She grabbed his arm and in a soft voice spoke in his ear. "He always fights his own battles. He won't thank you for it." Rockwell was far bulkier than Seth, and his broad knees pinned Seth beneath him, seemingly rendering him helpless. Lot nodded in uncertain agreement and took a step back. He would give it 1 more minute, and then with or without Ferdy's consent, he would aid Seth. Outside in the corridor, Mr. Richards, the dean of the school, had been joined by 2 Gripper teachers. Gripper teachers never taught. In fact, no teacher who had a physical presence in Magic Fire Superior College ever taught. Instead, they controlled behaviour. Not that behaviour ever needed controlling. Students were usually escorted from one lesson to another without issue, and absorbed whatever information was preached to them inside the 6 state-of-the-art lecture theatres the school boasted. Dean Richards watched in disbelief as the screams outside the lecture hall illustrated the students relishing this fracas. In 17 years of leading the school, he had never witnessed such a lapse of self-control from any of his students. But as the screen's self-adjusting system zoomed in on Rockwell, who was steadily bouncing Seth's head like a basketball, Dean Richards realised the implausible. There was no less of self-control. Rockwell and the majority of the students were now visually delighted by this interruption of their normal routine. There was complete self-control amongst all of them. They were enjoying this battle. They were all readily indulging in the war. "Sir," Gripper Reed asked, swinging his static security pole in his hand, "do you want us to go in? Do you want us to break it up?" Dean Richards peered over his gold spectacles at this lesser being whose appointment had nothing to do with his academic intellect and everything to do with his peculiar, superior physical build. "Of course I want you to break it up, to resolve the situation." He inhaled sharply. "We will follow Protocol 8.1. Dean Richards placed the palm of his hand on the virtual door that led to the lecture hall. Seth ignored the hammering pain that seared the back of his head. As he eyed his tormentor above him, he saw that Rockwell believed he had won, that Seth had no fight left, and Rockwell's knees were suddenly lighter, lessening the pressure on Seth and enabling him to release his arms. Seizing this moment, in one sweeping motion, Seth freed his hands, manoeuvred one in between Rockwell's arms and above his own face. Using all his strength, he then gripped his opponent's arm just above the joint of his elbow, twisted it upwards and back, breaking Rockwell's joint instantly. Snap. Then, silence in the lecture hall. Stunned, the students were suddenly aghast at the brutality of it all, and shocked at the impossibility of what they had just witnessed. A natural birth had just defeated a clone. Here endeth the first lesson.